Canada, Mexico and USA have been selected to host the 2026 World Cup.
Soccer fans in Canada are celebrating big time today because Canada will be co-hosting the 2026 World Cup along with the U.S. and Mexico. The North American bid won out over Morocco after a suspenseful vote.
Imagine a tournament that was supposed to be a triumph for American sports. A tournament that was talked about in ESPN studios, discussed in think tanks, quoted by officials, and called a historic opportunity for an entire continent by journalists. In November 2022, when FIFA officially announced that the 2026 World Cup would be held in 3 countries for the first time in history, it seemed that the United States would be at its heart. With huge stadiums, colossal budgets, and large-scale infrastructure, it seemed that America simply could not miss this chance. But then something happened that no one expected. Not the experts, not the fans, not even the organizers themselves. Over the course of several months, quiet discussions, closed-door meetings, and internal reports began to paint a completely different picture. And by the beginning of 2025, it became clear that something very big was happening behind the scenes of the preparations for the biggest sporting event of the decade. Analysts around the world are asking the same question. How could a country with such resources, experience, and influence allow itself to lose control of a tournament that was supposed to be its biggest sporting moment of the 21st century? Why did cities that were considered favorites yesterday suddenly begin to lose their status as hosts of key matches? And how did 2 countries that many considered to be mere additions to the American super project suddenly find themselves at the center of international football's attention? What was happening behind the scenes at FIFA headquarters forced a rethinking of many things. The reports that landed on the desks of the organization's leaders pointed to a contrast that only needed to be noticed, where high expectations turned into long delays, where confidence gave way to haste, and haste gave way to attempts to catch up with their own plan. American preparations began to stall. Meanwhile, work was in full swing on both sides of the border, as if every week could be decisive. In Canada and Mexico, deadlines were not just met, they were exceeded. And every stage completed, every inspection, every report gradually changed the balance of power. By the end of 2024, the same question was being asked more and more often in the corridors of football politics. If 2 neighbors are better prepared than the world's richest sporting power, who should get the most attention from the football world? And if the initial plan has to be revised for the sake of the tournament's success, who will be the partner that FIFA can trust with the most important matches? Today we will tell a story that turns the usual ideas about sports geopolitics upside down. It is a story of how 2 underestimated players became leaders, a story of a process that developed quietly, almost imperceptibly, but ultimately had an explosive effect. A story of how the 2026 World Cup unexpectedly ceased to be American, and most importantly, a story of why all this actually happened. At the beginning of this story, no one could have imagined that the grand project, which was supposed to become a symbol of American sporting leadership, would turn into one of the most spectacular organizational failures of the decade. When FIFA announced in 2022 that the tournament would be jointly hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, it seemed that America would be at the center of the whole structure. Experts were confident that the huge infrastructure, high-profile media, investments, and influence would make the U.S. not just a leading partner, but the actual host of the championship. In the first weeks after the announcement, it seemed that there was nothing much to discuss. The American side did not even hide its confidence. Some organizers said in interviews that the U.S. will decide how this show should look. But behind the scenes, the first warning signs began to appear as early as 2023. At first, they were minor. Revisions to renovation schedules, additional approvals, and expanded security measures. These things don't usually cause a stir, but they become alarming when they happen systematically. At the end of 2023, ESPN analyst mentioned that internal processes are too slow. At the time, it sounded like a routine comment, but it later became clear that this was where the first glitches began. By 2024, the situation had changed much more noticeably. According to insiders who had access to internal reports, 7 American cities were behind schedule. Problems arose at all levels. In Los Angeles, according to rumors, the architectural team was forced to recalculate the load on part of the stadium's structure after FIFA experts discovered inconsistencies in the plans with the height standards for camera installations. In New Jersey, the contractor unexpectedly requested additional funding, explaining this as unforeseen construction adjustments. In Dallas, a dispute between 2 major sponsors nearly halted work on upgrading the spectator areas. And these are just some of the real facts that gradually surfaced in the press. But there were also details that were not officially confirmed, but were discussed within the industry. For example, there was talk that one of the American venues could lose the right to host matches due to difficulties with integrating a new security system involving facial recognition technology at the entrance. The technology was experimental and, according to rumors, caused controversy between the organizers and local authorities who feared legal consequences. There is no confirmation of this, but the discussion was persistently repeated in analytical circles, reinforcing the feeling that something was going wrong. At the same time, political complications arose. Several American cities faced disagreements between municipal and federal authorities, particularly on issues such as temporary road closures and the provision of additional law enforcement personnel. Journalists noted that at some meetings, representatives of city administrations and federal services even argued over who should cover the additional costs. Because of this, some important decisions were delayed, and FIFA, known for its intolerance of missed deadlines, scrutinized reports more and more closely. While the American machine creaked and malfunctioned, the picture in Canada and Mexico was the opposite. Canadian cities worked so efficiently that FIFA inspectors, according to eyewitnesses, were surprised by the pace. The newly renovated stadiums in Toronto and Vancouver demonstrated exemplary preparation. Workers completed the upgrades ahead of schedule. City services conducted test checks of all security systems in advance, and the logistics routes were so carefully planned that they were used to train employees in other North American cities. There was even talk that one of the Canadian stadiums passed the FIFA inspection in record time, about 5 hours instead of the usual 11. FIFA did not officially comment on this, but the rumor persisted and clearly played into Canada's hands. The situation in Mexico was similar, but even more impressive. The historic stadium in Mexico City underwent a major renovation. The inspectors who visited it perceived this facility not just as a sports arena, but as a symbol that demanded respect. And here, reality intertwined with fiction. Some journalists claimed that the inspectors were so impressed by the atmosphere that they themselves asked for an additional tour of the renovated sections of the arena, even though this was not required by the regulations. This may have been an exaggeration, but the general trend was clear. Mexico demonstrated discipline, readiness, and experience. In Guadalajara and Monterrey, construction and modernization were completed on schedule. Transport hubs were modernized without delay. There was even a rumor that Mexican organizers were preparing a special cooling system for spectators in areas of the stadium exposed to the sun, an innovation that FIFA later praised as an interesting initiative. Perhaps it was not as unique as it was presented, but it reinforced the feeling of superiority in the preparations. Against the backdrop of these two enthusiastic examples, the American problems looked increasingly painful. And when FIFA headquarters began to compare the actual pace of work, the logical question arose, who should get the key matches? It was during this period, according to sources, that the discussion shifted from expectations to action. Starting in the summer of 2024, FIFA began conducting additional inspections of American cities, and the results, according to reporters, were not as convincing as they would have liked. Several documents contained phrases such as, "The process needs to be accelerated," or "reapproval is necessary." And while these formulations are not catastrophic, they become alarming when such comments are repeated in every other report. Meanwhile, the Canadian and Mexican reports were consistent. Ready, on schedule, no deviations. Behind the scenes, there was even a joke. If FIFA wants to sleep peacefully, let them call Canada. But the main thing that began to worry the US was that FIFA was gradually becoming convinced that the organization could not afford to risk the biggest tournament in its history. And when it comes to reputation, no country, even the most influential, gets special treatment. Thus, a situation gradually arose in which America went from being the main host to one of the parties, and Canada and Mexico became the unexpected leaders of the preparations. At first, it seemed impossible, then strange, then suspicious. And by the end of 2024, inevitable. And it was at this moment that it became clear that a historic turning point had already occurred, although no one had officially spoken about it yet. When updated reports on the preparations of North American cities began to pour into FIFA headquarters in early fall 2024, they revealed for the first time a contrast that had previously only been hinted at between the lines. Until then, the picture had looked complicated, but still manageable. The US had delays, Canada and Mexico had stability, but no one seriously believed that this could change the distribution of key matches. However, it was during this period that FIFA experts' assessments became more stringent and specific. Inspectors noted that despite the efforts of the American side, the pace of adjustments did not meet the updated requirements, and several large facilities, according to internal memos, needed additional security system certification. This was the first warning, but far from the last. It was then that, as sources later admitted, a question arose within the organization that began to change everything. Who is really 100% ready? This question took the situation out of its usual scenario. Until then, it was believed that the redistribution of matches was impossible in principle. Too loud a political move, too many contracts, too much investment. But the reality turned out to be different. FIFA was considering risks, not politics. According to reporters, the organization's internal analytical groups even created a special readiness index, which was assigned to each city based on the pace of work, stability of funding, state of infrastructure, and number of deviations from the schedule. According to unofficial data, several American cities were at the bottom of the ranking, while Canada and Mexico took the top spots. This document was never published, but the fact that it existed was constantly discussed behind the scenes. Against this backdrop, in early September 2024, FIFA began closed-door meetings to discuss possible adjustments to the tournament plan. Such meetings are common practice, but the nature of the discussions signaled that something big was brewing. At one of the meetings, as sources close to the organization later claimed, a phrase was uttered that some quoted almost verbatim: "We cannot allow logistical uncertainty to disrupt key stages of the tournament." At that moment, it became clear that FIFA was not going to wait for anyone to catch up with the schedule. They were preparing to make decisions based on facts, and the facts spoke for themselves. That was when the first quiet changes began to take place. They were not announced publicly, accompanied by press releases, or covered by official channels, but they were felt by those involved in the preparations. Representatives of the cities received updated requests. FIFA expert groups suddenly increased the number of inspections. In some cases, according to media reports, representatives of the organization conducted repeat inspections without prior notice, citing a desire to see the real picture. Several sources mentioned that one of the North American venues received comments on the quality of the field surface, even though a week ago it was considered fully compliant. These episodes seemed minor, but taken together, they made it clear that FIFA was looking for options and that the US could find itself in a weak position.